We're going to exercise brutal control over the podium and the time here, so I'm excited, with that note, to call up our keynote speaker, Nick Sinai, and Bill Franks of our founding member, Teradata, to introduce him. Please welcome them.
Yeah, well, thanks everyone for coming today. I can tell you I was at this event last year, and it's amazing to see what a difference a year can make. As Hudson just went through, the Data Act went from being something that we all hoped might one day happen in some form or fashion, and now it's actually passed Congress and been signed by the President. So that's a huge motion that I think we owe Hudson and the whole coalition a round of applause for. Thank you, Hudson. So as Chief Analytics Officer for Teradata, I'm proud that my company was one of the founding members of this coalition. We absolutely do believe that open data can transform our government. And one of the first steps in that direction is going to be organizing data and adopting some standards across the enterprise, and that's where the Data Act is starting. And we know that through the adoption of these standards, government information is going to be made much more readily accessible and much more available for analytics. Analytics is what my company, Teradata, is all about. And we know that that data can help the company eliminate fraud, waste, and abuse while becoming more efficient. We've seen the same kind of analytics work across a broad range of industries. So this isn't about some theoretical approach that might work. It's a proven approach that's worked across the board in other industries, and we're really excited to see those same approaches be brought to bear on the government. And the Data Act, it's really just begun, right? It's signed into law, but there's a lot of work, and I think a lot of what you'll hear about today is going to be discussing some of that work. And our priority is helping to get this implemented correctly. And because of the value we see, we're also going to pursue similar initiatives for future transformations in both regulatory reporting and healthcare, as well as at the state level. We think that what the Data Act has done here applies much more broadly than simply the scope of even this initial success. So this brings us to our keynote speaker, United States Deputy Chief Technology Officer Nick Sinai. He's at the center of issues critical to the coalition, and he understands the power of analytics and the necessity of the standardization of data throughout the government's portfolio. He helps lead the President's open data initiatives to ensure the federal government is more transparent, participatory, and collaborative. He's a former venture capitalist, so he has been one of the administration's leading voices for new business opportunities that can be created when we do this to the data. And the exhibit hall over there, as was already mentioned, will be one place you can see what some of the companies are doing to offer this. So at the end, we might have a few minutes for questions. If so, I'll come up and help with those. But in the meantime, I'd like to welcome Nick Sinai.
Thank you, Bill, and thank you, Hudson. It's really fantastic to be here today. You know, Hudson's passion for open data is really contagious. It really is fantastic to see. And he said, you know, who has the job of open data? Well, you're looking at it. That's my job. I help lead the President's open data initiatives and the open government work as well. And it's a super exciting and humbling place to be. So last week, I was tremendously honored to be part of the U.S. delegation to the Open Government Partnership. And the Open Government Partnership is something that President Obama and 7 other heads of state, together with leaders from civil society, formed 3 years ago. It's essentially a number of governments working with civil society, with nonprofits, to develop and make open government commitments around increasing transparency, fighting corruption, a whole series of commitments, and then for civil society and independent organizations to keep us honest and score us on how well we are continuing to open the government. And it really is a fantastic mechanism and a different way of thinking about open government rather than top-down, but having non-government organizations be equal partners as we formulate plans and commitments, and then keeping us honest as we go ahead and execute those. So I thought I would actually read some of the President's remarks. I was going to try and do it justice, but I thought the best way to do this is to simply give you a flavor of what he said last Wednesday in New York. 3 years ago, the United States and 7 other nations launched this open government partnership to represent the other side of this equation, because when citizens demand progress, governments need to be able to respond. And in a new millennium flush with technology that allows us to connect with a tweet or a text, citizens rightly demand more responsiveness, more openness, more transparency, more accountability from their governments. In just 3 short years, this partnership has grown from 8 nations to 64. It has helped to transform the way governments serve their citizens. Together, we have made more than 2,000 commitments, improving how governments serve more than 2 billion people worldwide. More citizens are petitioning their government online, and more citizens are participating directly in policymaking. More entrepreneurs are using open data to innovate and start new businesses. More sunlight is shining on how tax dollars are spent. And more governments are partnering with civil society to find new ways to expose corruption and improve good governance. Here in the United States, we've been trying to lead by example. We're working to open up and share more data with entrepreneurs so they can pursue the new innovations and businesses that create jobs. We're working to modernize our Freedom of Information Act processes so it's easier for Americans to use so that they can see the workings of their government. And today, last week, I'm proud to announce a series of new commitments to expand and broaden our open government efforts. We're going to work more closely with the healthcare sector and state and local law enforcement, not just to improve public health and safety, but to better protect the privacy and personal information of the American people. We're going to improve transparency with our upgraded website, usaspending.gov, to make it easier for Americans to access and understand how the federal government spends their tax dollars. We're going to collaborate more closely with the private sector and the best minds in our country so that when we design websites and technologies to better serve the public, we're benefiting from the best of American ingenuity and the latest technologies. And because we know education is a cornerstone for progress, if we want good governance, we need an educated and informed citizenry. We're going to do more to help people in other countries, especially students, access the incredible online educational tools and resources that we have here in the States. So it was a pretty awesome speech last week, and as part of it, one of 4 of our new and expanded set of commitments that the President unveiled was a whole set of efforts around fiscal transparency, essentially a plan for Data Act implementation. The President has been committed to openness since day 1 of his administration when he signed the Memorandum on Transparency and Open Government. And last year, May 2013, the President signed the Open Data Executive Order, making open and machine-readable the new default for government information. We've been taking historic steps to make government-held data more accessible, more liquid, more useful, while also appropriately safeguarding sensitive information and rigorously protecting privacy. We're committed to unleashing this data from the vaults of the federal government to fuel and spur innovation that grows the economy, but also advancing government efficiency and accountability. And the global positioning system and weather data are these 2 canonical examples of how we have opened up government data to create a fantastic set of diverse businesses, whole industries that use GPS information and that use weather data in a variety of really fantastic ways. And so just on weather data, it powers your local news weathercaster, it powers weather.com and a whole series of apps, it powers a series of financial instruments, it really powers a multi-billion-dollar ecosystem of companies that are taking that data, putting analytics and value on top of it, and delivering it as systems, as services, as software, as financial products in so many different ways. And that's just one small example. What we're doing here is across all of the fantastic data that the federal government has, and whether that is regulatory, whether it's financial, as we're talking about here today, and federal spending, whether it's programmatic. There's so much opportunity to continue to open this data, make it liquid, and let all of you do kind of fantastic things with it. We believe that open data is is good for the economy and good for America. A recent McKinsey report sized the global opportunity at $3 trillion to take this data and better improve industries. And so the administration has been launching a series of open data initiatives in a number of areas. So in health, in energy, in climate, in public safety, education, global development. In each of these, we've been working to unlock data, to catalyze the use of that data with data jams and data paloozas, to celebrate private sector innovation, and continue to build momentum. And so to help the federal agencies implement the President's executive order, we've launched Project Open Data. So this is something that the White House launched, but it is a completely collaborative and open website. So I encourage you all to check it out. It has case studies, it has free code and software tools to help agencies implement the President's executive order. And I should say that open data isn't just about, and the President's executive order isn't just about making data liquid at the end, at point of dissemination. It's really about managing information as an asset, as a strategic asset. And so stop and think about it. We inventory battleships and we inventory people, right, with our HR systems, and we inventory tables and chairs. But we need to start inventorying data. It's one of our most precious assets other than people. And it can be reused and in so many fantastic ways. And so that's really what the executive order and the related open data policy is about: managing information as a strategic asset, making open and machine readable the default, the starting point, and to really engage early and often with all of you about where to prioritize our time and efforts. Data.gov, the central site to find U.S. government data, was relaunched in 2014 using open source software and open design. And we continue to get a lot of fantastic input from the community. And we continue to open data in a variety of different places. So just last week at the UN Climate Summit, the President announced new data and new tools to strengthen global resilience to climate change. We recognize that data is a national asset, and data is 21st century infrastructure. So let me give you a few examples, because I've been talking at a high level. So the FDA, for example, has launched Open FDA, and this is adverse events. Essentially, when you or your doctor, there's a problem with prescription medication, the healthcare system, your doctor or your hospital report back to the FDA that you took a particular medication, your hand swelled up, it was not kind of supposed to happen. And so there's this fantastic database of adverse events that the FDA has. And this has a tremendous amount of value for public health. But it traditionally was released as a quarterly report, and people were using the Freedom of Information Act to get that kind of information. And the data wasn't perfect internally either. It needed some cleaning and structuring and those types of things. And so at our Health Data Palooza this year, the FDA launched an adverse events application programming interface. And within a couple weeks, they had over 1 million hits to this API, from over 20,000 unique IP addresses, and they had a couple applications built for public health. And it's really fantastic to see that kind of latent demand, and we see that across so many of our data assets. The Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, CMS, released charge data. So what do hospitals charge for common inpatient and outpatient procedures? And for a hip transplant, you could see that in a same metro market, it would cost $18,000 at one hospital and or $120,000 at a hospital a couple miles down the road. So it was just astounding and made front page news for the New York Times. Jon Stewart gave Health and Human Services an award for competency. I hope he gives us additional ones. And so there's just so many fantastic examples like that. NOAA is another great example. So the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration, they collect and create 20 terabytes of data a day. Yet they can only make 10% of that available online. And they want to unlock the power of the other 90%. And so they are asking for your help. They've put out a request for information, and they're asking, how can we continue to make this data a public good, but get the investment model right so that we can open and make this available to the world. And so it's a really interesting challenge. I think NIH is another fantastic example, right? So you have all of this fantastic genomics and microbiome data and all this great health data. We're doing a lot of work on brain science. And so how can this information be put to the public good while still rigorously protecting privacy? Really interesting opportunities. I was just looking on Zillow the other day, and I started to notice that there's a section where you can, Zillow's the internet website where you can look at housing, and you can start to look at schools. And the school portion is powered by a company, nonprofit actually, called Great Schools. And Great Schools gets all of its information from the US Department of Education. And so it's just an example of whether it's a small company, a startup, or a large company. Zillow is a public company. Whether you're searching for a drug on Google or Bing, that knowledge box on the right is actually populated by open government data. So open government data really is in so many places and kind of helping power the information, the services, and the digital economy. The flip side to this is the My Data side, the personal data portability. We are incredibly focused on empowering Americans with secure and useful electronic access to their own information. So this includes Blue Button at the Department of Veterans Affairs and in the military health system and at Health and Human Services, is getting access to your own prescription data, your own health records. You should be able to get access to that. You should be able to view it, you should be able to download it, and you should be able to transmit it. Same is true with energy data. So the Department of Energy and the Department of Commerce collaborate with a number of distribution utilities, electric utilities, to make your energy usage available back to you in machine-readable format. IRS this year has launched something they call Get Transcript, the ability to get your own tax information as an individual taxpayer. Tremendously helpful for a number of different services. And the Department of Education has launched My Student Data, so students and their families can get access to things like their student loan information. So these are helping inform Americans in so many crucial decisions, but they're also helping spur the development of innovative consumer applications and services, not unlike the showcase that you have here today. So with My Data, it's your data, right? I mean, you want it protected. You want the government to hold on to it and secure it. But you also want it to be liquid for you, right? You want to be able to get access to it. You want to be able to use it in a way that works in your life. And you want to share it with those that you trust. So we're really proud of both our open data efforts and our personal data or My Data efforts. And the Data Act really builds upon all of these critical efforts. And the federal government, industry and civil society, nonprofits all have important roles to play. And so I thought I would offer a few kind of guiding principles as we think about Data Act implementation. First, let's have a relentless focus on the users of data. Data by itself doesn't do anything. It is the use of data by humans, by software, that's what is really exciting. At the end of the day, that's how we're really going to transform federal spending data, contracts data, all of that is a focus on the use. I know last week Treasury held a workshop with a diverse group of users and got a lot of tremendous feedback. And I hope that in all of this, we continue to do a lot of iterative focus on the use. The White House recently released a U.S. Digital Services Playbook with best practices from the private and public sector. Play number 1, understand what people need. The needs of people, not the constraints and complexity of government, should drive technical and design decisions. We need to continue to test products that we build, websites that we build in federal government with users. And we also need to think about users of data, which I think is something that we don't talk enough about, is when you are consuming data, or if you are consuming it as software from an application programming interface, you're a user of data. And so all of these fantastic companies that are here today are users of our data, and we need to make sure that we are engaging in frequent user testing with them as well. My second principle is, let's be relentlessly iterative. Even the best business plans don't survive contact with customers. I've seen standards development processes that last years on paper, but don't get adopted. The internet mantra is rough consensus running code. Let's openly and transparently find what we need in terms of standards, but let's not make the perfect the enemy of the good. Let's make the data liquid. Let's focus on making the data liquid, engage with users, and iterate. And third, let's be relentlessly open. We don't have all the answers about how to implement the Data Act. I think we have a good theory of the case, and you'll hear some fantastic plans today. But we're eager to hear your input and feedback. Let's openly collaborate about standards. Let's design and develop USAspending.gov openly as much as we can. I think as inspiration, the Department of Interior is rebuilding or building a extractives transparency website. I'd encourage you guys to all check it out. It's really great stuff. So I'm really excited about the conference today. I think a big kudos to what you have all been able to accomplish. I know not a lot of legislation gets passed in this Congress or in the last Congress, but it is really exciting to see a subject, open data, and specifically open data for federal spending, that has brought so many people together on both sides of the aisle, and we are really excited to move forward together. So thank you.
Well, thank you. I think you all agree that was informative and interesting as well. What I want to do is I'll start with a question or two, and then I guess, Hudson, we have the clock. You'll watch the clock for us? 9 minutes, so I think we have plenty of time. So the first, I've heard about something called the U.S. Digital Service. Can you describe a little bit about what that is and how that might tie to the Data Act?
Absolutely. So the healthcare.gov helped catalyze the recognition about the challenges we have with federal IT. We spend approximately $80 billion in federal IT. And by one report, the Standish Group essentially put out a study saying that 94% of federal IT projects underperform or outright fail. And so we have to do a better job about delivering government digital services. And that much is clear to everybody. And so one of the things that we've done is launch the U.S. Digital Service. And this is a group of the brightest from the private sector and public sector focused on government digital services. And so this is a small elite unit inside of the White House. It is in the Office of Management and Budget, and it's paired with a larger unit called 18F. That's based inside the General Services Administration, and 18F is a rapidly growing unit of designers, developers, and product managers inside of government. And together, the U.S. Digital Service and 18F are bringing a lot of our expertise in-house. We realize that this is a large, there's a large opportunity set here, but there's just tremendous need to have that kind of expertise in-house. And so we're really excited about where they are going. And in fact, one of the things that they did is publish this digital services playbook. And so they're not going to be able to consult on every IT project, either USDS or 18F. It's simply so large. But we did think it was important to publish some rules of the road and a set of best practices. And so the playbook at playbook.cio.gov, I encourage you guys all to check it out. Play 13 is actually another one of my favorites. It's default to open. And so already we're having some great collaborations between these two teams and Treasury and OMB. And I'm excited about how they can help with a number of the technical challenges and ways to move forward with the Data Act.
Right, right. And I really liked, you had a variety of examples of where some agencies have done a pretty good job and are getting ahead of the curve in terms of open data and these kinds of initiatives in general. Are there any patterns you've seen in some of the examples of who's ahead and who's behind and what you think it might take to bring everybody up to a equal level?
Yeah, so the comment I'd make here is that open data is a means, not an ends, right? And so those agencies that have embraced making data liquid and useful have done it in the context of trying to achieve their mission. And so for those data-centric agencies, oftentimes data and information is so key and so central to achieving mission. And so in the healthcare agencies, HHS, for example, it's pretty clear that in the transformation of healthcare, as we move from volume to value, we're going to need data-fueled products and services that focus on keeping folks healthy and better coordinate care. And so that's a pretty big shift in the healthcare system, and data is absolutely going to be central, both for payers and providers and everyone else. Same thing is true in commerce, for example. Secretary Pritzker has made data one of her 4 priorities for the department, and they really see opening up all of the fantastic data that they've got. I talked about NOAA, but there's a ton of geospatial information that Census has that they can responsibly open. And so what has made certain agencies or departments move faster is they see it tied to mission, right? So NASA sees all of this information related to space and harnessing American ingenuity. That's what has got them excited. And so it tends to be agencies and departments that are more data-centric, and it tends to be those that are able to tie it to mission. Last example would be Department of Transportation is doing a really fantastic job. And they see the over 30,000 roadway deaths as something that they are absolutely dedicated to reducing. And so how are they working with state and local governments? How are they working with companies to provide more information, more structured data that folks can take and use to help combat that? So it's really tying things to mission is what drives federal governments to move faster. I mean, the departments to move faster.
Excellent. Do we maybe have time for one or two from the audience? 2? All right. Just raise your hand and we have some microphones they can bring around. I see one right in front of you there, Hudson.
Yeah, a question about how to reduce the risk of freeing the data. So is there a way that you could give immunity to federal agencies to release data for the data quality issues contained therein, i.e. USDA choice, USDA prime, and so forth? Because I think the fear that I sense from much of the executive branch is they're not interested in sharing it for fear that the data is going to make them look less competent.
So I think there's a really interesting philosophical question here is, do things have to be perfect before you release them? And I would say no. And And the more that we can release, well, let me kind of dissect that, right? Because you have to make sure that you have the security and privacy controls for information that needs to be rigorously protected. But if you're talking about information and data that has already gone through those checks, but may not be perfect, that is stuff we should absolutely open to the world. And I think other countries, the UK, for example, has shown us that when you release imperfect data, and data will always be imperfect. So, you know, it is messy by definition. And so releasing it to the world helps us iterate and helps it make it stronger. And having all of you identify how to reconcile it and how to improve it. The president talked about this last week, where he said, you know, working with civil society isn't always easy for governments, with nonprofits, but it makes us stronger. And I think this is absolutely true with open data, is we need to make it liquid, and we need to iterate, because it's not let's just dump it out there and hope for the best. Let us make it more liquid. Let's talk with the users. Let's find out how we can improve it. And sometimes you'll have to sandbox it, right? You'll have to say, let's have a safe space. And that's exactly what actually the FDA did, is they said, hey, we're going to beta test this API for this particular database, have people work with it, and then we're going to throw it open to the world. But you have to kind of not make the perfect the enemy of the good. Last question?
Nick, this is Stuart Goodpasture with Wells Fargo Bank. Early in your comments, you read from the president's speech last week, and I believe it was in there where he said one of the initiatives is to modernize the Freedom of Information Act. Mm-hmm. So what are some of the ways that a modernized Freedom of Information Act would look different from what we know today?
So today, the way the Freedom of Information Act works is a lot of the times it's on paper, right? I mean, a lot of times you're sending things in via paper, or they're sending you back via paper. And even when things are electronic, there's a fair amount of shuttling between different agencies, because it's about perfecting the information request. And so how can we have a more streamlined user experience so that users, requesters, can get to the agency that is most likely to have responsive requests? So that's a big piece of what we're thinking about. The other piece is more common regulations or standards, right? You have kind of differing fee structures, differing timelines. There's a bunch of unnecessary complexity that we might be able to standardize, and so we have a series of processes around there. And then the user experience is frankly, could be improved significantly. And so this is another great example where 18F has a really great team. They're building a product here for really the next generation of one-stop shop for FOIA, and they're consulting extensively with the agencies so that they make sure that they're designing something that surfaces proactive information and makes it also easier for the agencies, as well as making it easier for the requesters. And then finally, it's important for us to get input from experts, and so there's a federal advisory committee on FOIA modernization. Of course, there's a whole bunch of e-discovery and internal processes that we're seeking to improve as well. So there's a whole suite of activities there, and I'd be happy to share more details with you.
I think we're out of time, so thanks again, Nick.